There are different strategy typologies that organizations can utilize when they are framing how they want to think about their strategic initiatives and their plans. And so a gentleman by the name of Porter, that's his last name, he developed this typology in order to help us make sense of the different ways that organizations can position themselves in the marketplace. Differentiation strategies are those that compete based on product innovation, product quality, customer service. It is innovative, it is creative, and it tends to demand top dollar. Cost leadership is like a Walmart, right, where they compete on price. So they have to keep their costs down, and they have to manage their expenses well, and they have to be efficient, not just effective, but also efficient in how they use things so that they can manage their very tight profit margins. And then a focus strategy is basically how they position themselves in a niche market. For example, I can differentiate myself in a small niche market, or I can use cost leadership in a niche market. So a niche market might be, well, a number of years ago, organics and organic products were a rarity. They tended to be sold only in health food stores. You never saw them in mainstream grocery stores or available at major retailers like Walmart and things like that. And now you can find organic products at Costco, at Walmart, at Target, at any local grocery store. But at the time, 20 odd years ago, they were a niche market, and they positioned themselves as a niche differentiation strategy. And the idea here is they knew that they could charge top dollar because people wanted to have healthy foods, and they would equate organic foods with healthier. They don't have the same kind of preservatives and pesticides in them, understandably. So that's a way that the organic food market could position themselves to charge top dollar, but in a very narrow niche, right? Not in a world, in a very large niche. Now it's much more differentiation strategy, not focus strategy, because organic food is located everywhere. You can go to grocery stores, you can go into restaurants, and people use fresh cut, farm to table organic products. So that is the way to think about those three strategies. Now, if we're doing a differentiation strategy, the nice thing is we get to charge top dollar for our products, and we get to pay top dollar for our we pay top dollar for our employees to have those skills. So we're willing to pay the money to have good skills, and in turn, we pass that cost along to our customers. So Apple products are differentiation strategy. They pay their employees top dollars, and then they charge us top dollar in order to buy their phones and use their services. Cost leadership is like a Walmart, as I said, and they have to compete on cost. And there's a couple of different ways we can improve profitability in an organization, right? We can sell more product, or we can have a bigger profit margin and sell less product. So it's kind of a math problem, right? We can either increase this or decrease that. And so with Walmart, they're going to sell a lot of products, but they can't charge top dollar for them. So what they have to do is get enough of a volume sale out there to sell as many products as they can to manage their profit margin. Now, from a cost leadership strategy, they are going to compete by making sure they keep their costs low so that there's very little that impacts that profit margin other than the bare bones of what is needed to run their business, which would be, what it takes to run the store, what it takes to pay the employees, which is very minimal. And that's how they manage those profit margins so that they can also be profitable. And obviously the same thing for the focus strategy. So another strategy typology is by researchers called Miles and Snow, and these align fairly consistently with the differentiation strategy and the cost leadership strategy. And let me share with you how that is. A prospector strategy typology is focused on innovation. Well, that's very similar to our differentiation strategy from Porter, right? Then we have the defender strategy, which focuses on low-cost production and low-cost products. Again, that aligns with the cost leadership strategy of Porter. But then we have analyzers who can do both. That there are some companies that will innovate where they can, and they will also cost cut where they can. So there are, for example, designers. And let's talk about Martha Stewart, for example. Martha Stewart has high-end products that she can sell. And so because she's a very entrepreneurial woman, she has a lot of innovation that she engages in, and so she can charge top dollar for things, but she also used to sell in Kmart. And Kmart is a low cost and a low price competitor. So they compete on price. And so she knew that there were aspects of her business that she could sell for high top dollars. And then there were aspects of her business that she wanted to make accessible to people and sell volume with low cost margins. And so you basically are arguing that they can adapt to the market needs. The last group is something that Porter doesn't talk about but is relevant here, which is the reactor strategy, which by definition is not a strategy. So let me be clear about that. A reactor strategy is a non-strategy because if you're reacting to things, you're not being strategic. Strategic requires planning. And if all you're doing is reacting and not planning, then you are a reactor, in which case then you really don't have a good strategy involved. So Miles and Snow, Porter, doesn't matter which one you use or think about, they're basically the same. We compete on innovation, we can compete on price. Miles and Snow adds, we can do a little bit of both. We can have maybe innovate here, and then we can cost cut over here, and depending on the market needs. And then, of course, it adds the reactor or the non-strategy, which would be certainly relevant for Porter, although he doesn't address that as a meaningful strategy because it's not a strategy. When we are developing and refining our strategy, we have to keep our stakeholders in mind. Now, stakeholders are anybody who impacts or is impacted by the behaviors of the organization. And what I mean by that is anybody that can influence the company in some way. And now, most of the common stakeholders are things like our customers, our employees, our shareholders who have invested money in the company. But I want to differentiate for you the difference between a stakeholder and a shareholder. A shareholder is someone who owns stock. They also happen to be a stakeholder, but not all stakeholders are shareholders. So when we talk about stakeholders, it's really anybody that's involved in the business of the organization directly, indirectly. And a shareholder, and which is also Milton Friedman's theory of shareholder value and only paying attention to what the shareholders want. That's in contrast to stakeholder theories. Now, we all know from our research in ethics, and you're going to learn this when you take your ethics class if you haven't done so already, there's a difference between stakeholder theory and shareholder theory. And stakeholder theory cares about the balance of all the needs of our important stakeholders, our most important stakeholders. We can't meet the needs of everybody because it's near impossible to do that. But shareholders are only one stakeholder. So if we only emphasize the shareholder needs, the shareholders may drive us to do things that may be inappropriate because their need for profit, their need for financial gain may overlook long-term needs to invest versus short-term needs to invest. So both of those are important. So when we think about our strategy formation, we really do need to think about all of the stakeholders. If we're going to do something, how does it affect our employees? How will it benefit our customers? What will our competitors consider? What would they do in contrast to what we are deciding to do? And so all of those things have to be taken into account. So that strategy formation process is the mission, vision, and values. We get that established. We do our SWOT analysis or our environmental analysis where we look at the internal and the external environments. We decide the general typology that we want to use, whether we are innovation focused or cost focused, and then we figure out how we're going to implement this plan. But we need to know what the plan is, and we need to have a short-term plan and a long-term plan. So what we're going to do in the next year, what we're going to do in the next 3 to 5 years are really an important part of that process. And so once the organization determines what it is that they want to do, then it makes it easier for all those sub-disciplines in the company, marketing, finance, accounting, manufacturing, HR, et cetera, we all then develop strategies in alignment with that. Once we've formulated the strategy, we move to the implementation phase, which is we develop our plan and then we follow through and execute the plan. And the goal is our plans have to make sure that we are capitalizing on our strengths, we are managing our weaknesses, we are looking for opportunities and figuring out how we can utilize those opportunities and try to avoid all the threats out there based on what we were talking about. So we want to leverage our capabilities where we have our strengths, and we want to protect those areas where we have weaknesses so that we don't lose their ability to function. And of course, this all ties into HR strategy, which is now looking at how does the human capital or the human resources of the company play a role in the strategy implementation. Again, as we think about implementation, everybody plays a role in the implementation, whether you're a top management team or an entry-level worker. Everybody needs to understand it. Everybody needs to know how to implement it. Everybody needs to know who our competitors are, what kind of industry we're in, what our mission is. If we don't know that, we are not going to be as successful as we can be. So our goal is to, first of all, make sure we understand the strategy. We understand that the goals that we want to set for ourselves in the organization is going to support that strategy. And we want to make sure then that all the information is communicated to our employees so they know what we're doing. You should be able to talk to any employee in the company and they should know these are the things that we're trying to accomplish this year. These are the things that are important to us this year. And when we can do that, that helps us to be successful.